Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Stitch Sessions. It's a new month. It's September. We know what that means. We need to get into our gift of crochet for the month. So for September, in honor of back to school, back to work, and back to regular schedules, I decided we would work on this really cute lunch bag design. And I've incorporated some monogram stitching here, and we're going to get into that in today's tutorial. I made this a little bit wider so that sometimes when you have certain larger size Tupperware containers, it'll sit nicely on the bottom. So I created this just easy handle, just opens up just nicely like that. It's got a square-ish bottom, or rectangular as you can see. And I used a couple of different stitches. In a previous video, you've seen me use the herringbone half double crochet stitch, but I recommend, if you're a little bit newer, to start off with a single crochet stitch, which is what I used when I worked on the monogram here. And I'll go into all the details of how you can create your own monogram, as well as how I constructed the lunch bag. So I'm so excited you're joining us for another gift of crochet this month. So let's just grab our materials and let's get to it. Okay, so here are the materials you're going to need for your lunch bag. As you can see, I've got some of this variegated yarn left over from my picnic placemat that I made in the summertime, and I have tons and tons of this. So I am going to be using this up for my lunch bag. I also picked up 2 balls of solid colors because I'm going to use one side of the bag to put my monogram on. So this is the Bernat Handicrafter cotton, 100% cotton. Love to use cotton for bags. I just find it's much sturdier. You can definitely use any yarn you like, but I prefer the cotton. This particular color is Country Red, and I have just plain white, and this one is the Azalea color that I used for the picnic placemats you'll probably recognize. So the other thing you're going to need is always a pair of scissors on hand, a darning needle, and for this particular project, I'm using my favorite hook, which is the 5mm hook, also known as an H or an 8. The other tool you're going to need for this project is a stitch graph, I guess we'll call it. And you can create your own on a site called Stitch Fiddle, and I'll put a link in the description box down below. So this is how I created my particular design that I wanted, which is my initial, the letter K. And so you can go on the site and it will graph it out for you, and you just design it, and this will help you figure out the number of stitches. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about this once we get to the side of the bag that we're going to monogram on. It can be a little daunting. It may look a little daunting. It's not that hard. So it just takes a little bit of patience and taking your time. So what we're going to do first is we are going to get you started just making your first side of the bag. So what's going to happen is we're going to create one long rectangle, which will then be folded upward, and then we'll crochet the 2 sides of the bag separately. So to begin, we are going to start with a slip knot. Once you have your slip knot, we are going to chain 40. Now I am just choosing 40 because I want my bag to sit a little bit wider. If you've got a lunch bag on hand already, you can just do the number of chains to the width of that bag that you prefer. But I am going to do 40 chains. Once you have your 40 chains, make sure it just sits nice and balanced so it's not too bunched up or too tight anywhere. Then we're going to just chain an additional 1 because we're going to be using the single crochet stitch. So there's no stitch count multiple of any sort. So once you've chained your additional one in the second chain from the hook, you're then going to insert your hook, pull through, and you're going to resolve a single crochet stitch. Okay, and we go into the next stitch and we will do the exact same thing. As always, you want to make sure that your stitches are nice and even, that you're not creating them too tightly nor too loosely. I would say, you know, things like bags, in fact, I would probably say it's better to be a little tighter than looser in a bag project, because usually you've got weight in the bag. So you just don't want it to be so tight that you can't fit your hook into the stitches, especially for that first chain row. So this is exactly what you're going to do. You can see the variegated colors are coming in. You're going to do one single crochet into each stitch all the way until you get to the end. Just coming up to the last stitch of my row here. And once you've done your 40 single crochets, your work should look a little something like this. And again, just kind of stretch it out a little bit, make sure it's not twisted. And so now for row 2, it will be the same thing for all the subsequent rows from here. So we're going to chain 1, you'll turn your work, and remember into the second chain, into the second stitch. Always remember this stitch here belongs or is the base of that chain 1, which will represent a single crochet. Now, having said that again, we want to be careful that we don't stitch that chain too tightly. Because it's only one chain, it's easy for it to get buried in here and then it will scrunch up your work. So make sure to keep that fairly relaxed. So in that second stitch, we will insert our hook and continue on with a single crochet. Okay, so it should sit nicely just like that. So I'm going to do that again into the next stitch. We will single crochet and we continue on into the next stitch. Okay, so your work will look something like this. So this is it. It's really simple. This is the repeat. You're going to do this all the way to the end, chain 1, turn your work, and do that again. So the length or the height of my bag, I'm making it so that it will be 32 rows in height. What we want to do is we want to single crochet 45 rows in total so far. So this will account for 32 rows in height and then another 12 rows that will be the bottom or the base of our bag. At that point, we will then introduce our solid color, and which will create the backdrop for our monogram. So that's one of the main reasons why I will stop using this variegated yarn, because if we're going to be doing a monogram, it's much more difficult to see against a background of variegated yarn. So that is why I've got the solid colors. So go ahead and do 45 rows of your single crochets, and I will meet up with you at that point. So make sure to pause the video, and if you need to go back, make sure you do so, but I will meet you at the end of 45 rows. Okay guys, once you've got your 45 rows done, your work should look something like this, and you can tell the variegated pattern came out so lovely. Now, full disclosure, I stopped doing single crochets for my stitch. I actually went back and I used that herringbone half double crochet stitch. It's just a little extra extension of the single crochet, and I had loved it so much in the placemat, I thought this is just going to make the bag a little bit more interesting. So if you would like to use this pattern for your bag, I will put the link to this tutorial in the description box down below so you can use this. But I still did 45 rows. So if you are a brand new crocheter and you're sticking to your single crochets, which I strongly recommend, still do your 45 rows. Okay, so what I've done here is I've put little stitch markers on the end so I know where my 32nd row is, and then my 45th row is down at the end here. So now, if I were to fold that at the 32nd row mark, this is actually going to be the height of my bag, and this represents the bottom. Okay, and then now we're going to start working on the front panel, which is to make this monogram. So basically, this monogram, the way I did it, is going to represent my single crochet stitches. So each block, and hopefully you can see that in this light here, each block represents one single crochet stitch. Now you can certainly do this in double crochets, but I just chose the single crochet stitch. Now, it is not necessarily to scale. So if I put this here, it obviously is much smaller. Of course, you should always do a gauge swatch. I am terrible for doing that. I kind of hate doing them. So because I know how many rows I've got and relatively the size of my palette, this is where I got my numbers from. So I knew that I had 40 stitches across and 32 stitches high. So that's what I entered into the program. It's called Stitch Fiddle. And again, there'll be a link down below so that you can create your own. Now, the only thing is I made a boo-boo because initially, if you can see that, I made it 40 rows high. So in fact, I only want it 32 rows high. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minus 4 rows from the bottom and 4 rows from the top. So imagine that all the white in this diagram is white yarn and the red is red yarn. Now in my case, my background is going to be red and my foreground is going to be white. So it just ended up being this particular color in this diagram. So what happens is each of these blocks represents a row. So as you can see, I've started making notes here. And so row 1, we're just going to use this as an example, would just be 40 stitches across of the, in my case, the red color. So when I made notes for row 1, I did the arrow going this way. Because I'm right-handed, I'm starting from the right side and moving my way to the left. For row 2, as you can see, I made the arrow going this way so that I know the number of stitches I need going in that direction. Because remember, we're going to be turning our work back and forth. So this is the diagram, and then I actually wrote out the number. So I'm just going to take you to where I put my monogram. So that's why it says row 1 here, because I just wanted to be very clear. So what I did is I ran a highlighter. That's why you see the yellow, just so visually I could see where I was. So I ran a highlighter for all the odd rows. So I still have more to do. So that way I can identify all my odd rows are going to be when I know my work is facing front, or I have the right side of my work facing me. When I'm working on the blank rows, I know that I'm going to be working on the back side of my work. So, for example, row 1, I am doing all these in my background color. So for me, that's going to be the red, or in this diagram, it's the white. So for row 1, for me, red, I'm going to do 26 stitches of red. Then I will switch and do 3 stitches of white, which are these 3 blocks right here. Then I will go back and do 11 stitches of red for the remaining row. Every single row should always equal 40 stitches at the end. So if you take these numbers, they will equal to 40. So once I get to the end here, I'm going to chain 1 because I'm doing a single crochet. I'm going to turn my work. And now row 2, or all the even rows, will not be colored here for me. Okay, so just ignore the fact that this says 8, because remember, that's starting right from the bottom, and I'm just starting right from where I begin my letter K here. So that's why I put 2. So once I chain 1, I turn my work. Now I'm going to be working these blocks going in this direction. So that's why it's not difficult, but you've got to pay attention to the detail. So my row 2 with my arrow going this way, I know that I need 12 red stitches. So if you were to count these blocks here, it's 12 stitches before I hit my letter here. And now once I turn back to my foreground color, which for me will be white, I need 5 blocks or 5 white stitches. So if I go down here, white equals 5. That's correct. Then I will do 9 red stitches. So after these 5, there's 9 red ones here. For you, the diagram is white, but for me, again, it'll be red. I'm hoping that this is not confusing you, but because it can be funny with all these different colors. Then I will switch back to my white for 4 stitches, and then I'll go back to my red for the last 10. And that's what you see the notes I've made here. So again, at the end, all of these stitches should always equal 40. I will chain 1, turn my work, and now my front side of the work is facing me again. So now this is my row 3. I'm going to be working this way. So each block of color represents a stitch, and that's how you would work it back and forth until you get all the way up here. Okay, I'm just go directly to Stitch Fiddle and you can make your own. Okay, so there's the explanation. Now I'm going to kind of start you off and take you through working through this diagram. I had to do a bit of untangling there. So I'm introducing my new color here. Hopefully this is not going to throw my camera off. So I haven't snipped off this yarn yet. What I want to do is I want to introduce my new color. Just leave a bit of a tail there. And I'm going to pull that through for my chain 1. And funny enough, it's very similar to the color I have on my hook. And I'll just pull that tightly. And I'll turn my work. So actually, now I will snip off, and then I can work that tail in afterwards. Okay. So I've turned my work. Everything is a little bit loosey-goosey here, but it will tighten in a moment. So that's my short tail of the color I just snipped off. And so for the first 4 rows, it's just going to be 1 single crochet continuing on into each stitch. So that's what I'm going to do. And so what I'm also going to try and keep in mind is I want to work over these short tails. So I'm just going to tuck them in and work over them. Later on, once we start working on the monogram portion, you're going to see that we are going to carry our yarn. So we're not going to snip off as we've done so far up until now. We're going to use a technique of carrying the yarn with us. So we can change colors easily back and forth. So for now, once I've chained 1, I'm going to go into that next stitch. And just like you've been doing, if you've been using your single crochets, we're just going to single crochet 1 into each stitch all the way across. And we're going to do this for 4 rows. Okay, and I had used the herringbone half double crochet stitch for the back of my bag, but now I am definitely going to use a single crochet stitch for this portion. So I'm just I'm just working right over my tails and keeps it nice and tidy out of the way. There we go. So go ahead and do your 4 rows, and then we will begin our monogram. Okay, I have finished my 4 rows. So this is going to be the front side of my work. So if I just take my sheet here, and we're going to start on the monogram row. So this is for me what I'm calling row 1 of actually working the monogram. So in row 1, I'm going to work all of these stitches until I hit here. So for me in row 1, that means I'm going to do 26 stitches still using my red yarn. So I will chain 1 here because I came to the end and I've turned my work. So remember that the chain 1 counts as 1. So I'm going to continue on and single crochet for the first 26 stitches. Okay, so I have done 25 stitches. So we still have one more stitch to do before we change colors. So what's going to happen here is I will begin my 26th stitch. So I'll insert and pull through, but I need to resolve it with my new color. So that is how you're always going to start a new section. And that is, you have to make sure that you resolve the previous stitch with the new color. And that's what's going to make it look very uniform. Okay, so I have my white and I'm going to just leave a bit of a tail there. And I'm going to pull the white through that 26th stitch. Okay, so the actual stitch gets finished and then the white is the new color that's going to feed over into the next couple of blocks. It is a bit loosey-goosey right now. Just kind of pull both ends a little bit taut so that it can sit. And now we're going to continue always working with 2 yarns. And I'm going to show you how that's going to work. So let me just grab my sheet here. So we've done our 26 stitches all the way across. So this is where we're at. So we need to stitch 3 stitches in our white color. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do 3 single crochets. So just insert as I usually do. And I'm going to, whoops, see that? I almost did that boo-boo. What I want to do is I actually want to just leave this one below and bring up my white, not my tail. So I'm going to bring up my white. This work can get a little tricky. We want to keep working over our red for now and this tail. So it's not that we're going to drop it. We are going to keep it and work over it for the next 3 stitches. So we've inserted, we're going to pull the white through and we'll resolve that single crochet so you can see it's being worked over. Then we're going to do a second one, making sure that your red stays tucked within it so it gets worked over. And now we need to do 3. So we'll pull through, but because we're going to change back to our red now, so if I refer back to the diagram, once we do 3, we're going to head back and do the rest of the row in our white color. So anytime we're going to change colors, we don't resolve the previous stitch. So this is where we have to really understand where our yarn is. So this is where now I'm going to put down my white and I'm going to bring up my red again. So see how we've been working over it? So now I'm going to work over my white, and to resolve this last single crochet, I'm going to pull through my red. I just pull that nicely like that. So when you look at it, it should look like the stitches just seamlessly change into the new color. Okay, and then the post also matches the color of the stitch on top. So now for the rest of the row, just going to keep working over this tail here, we are going to continue doing single crochets in our red color. And we just have to make sure that we keep our white tucked under and in that stitch the whole time. So I'll just do a few more here. Okay, so you can see it's just being tucked in. Right now it's a little bit thicker because we're working over that tail, but it should have a seamless look. So in fact, you can kind of see the effect it has here in the variegated. We are just doing a particular design here. So go ahead and finish your row of single crochets, keeping your white tucked in the whole time. And then we're going to talk about going on to the next row. So just coming up to the end of our row here, making sure to always keep the white tucked under. This is the last stitch. So I've got my 40 stitches still across, and now you can see we've introduced our white. So now it's time to chain 1 and turn our work. So you can see now that we're working with 2 yarns. And just be careful because it's easy to get them tangled up. So really try and keep the skeins a bit separated. So now we're going into row 2 of our actual monogram here. So I labeled my second row here, row 2. So we're now working this way, but because we're crocheting this way, this is why I made these notes here. So that now I know the next 12 blocks are red. Okay, so it can be really easy to get confused and go back here and start this way. If you do that, you're not going to get the K. So remember, now we are working on the back side of the K. So imagine that this was turned over, and actually you can see through that, so that's good. So technically we're now working here and doing these blocks across until we hit this next set here. Okay, so I know that I need to do 12 stitches, still continuing with the red. Now this can be a little tricky because you also want to make sure that you carry up your white in the meantime. So it just takes, so you're just going to tuck it up as best you can, and I'm tucking it up in front as opposed to behind because this is the back of my work, so I'm not too concerned if it shows a bit. So this first stitch, let me just get that out of the way, is the base of our chain 1 here. So we're not going to work into that, we're going to work into this one. And I just want to tuck this white up. So I'm going to go right into that one there. Pull through. So remember, this counts as 2 because the chain 1 counts as 1. And so we'll just end up cutting off. That's the end of that short tail there. So we have 2, and you can see the white peeking through there. That's because we've got the tail and the working yarn in there. And then we continue on. Okay, so I keep tucking that white in. So keep going for 12 stitches, and then we're going to reintroduce the white again. Okay, so I've done my 12 stitches. So you can see it started to overlap. So now my diagram is telling me I need to do 5 stitches in the white. So this is where we are, 5 stitches. So this is where now I am going to drop my red, or I'm going to tuck it down, and now I'm going to pick up my white to start working with it. And actually, see that? I just did a boo-boo. In my last stitch, I want to resolve it with the new color. Remember that. And if you don't believe me, try it this way because you'll see that the colors won't blend nicely. So I have to make sure that I resolve with the next color. So those are still the same number of stitches. I just needed to resolve with the white. So now I'm going to tuck the red down, and I'm going to continue on and do 5 stitches in the white. So I will insert, pull through, and pull through. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and here's the 5th one, but remember we're going to change back to the red. So this is where I would just yarn over with the red and pull through. Okay, so you can see the red was being nestled in there. It looks good. And now we are going to do, so we've just finished this row here. So we've just finished this section here. We're going to go back and do a bunch of the red before we go and do the white again. So we've just done 5 white. Now we need to do 9 red. So that's this section in here. So that's what we're going to do, 9 red. Okay, here's our 9th one coming up. So we pull through, and now we need to switch to the white. So we will resolve with the white. Okay, so now for the white, we will now need 4 white. So we just tuck the red under, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. And remember, on the last one, whoops, we resolve with the next color. So there we go. And now it calls for doing 10 red. So that means we're finishing off the row here. So we just tuck the white in and we work over it all the way to the end of the row. And I always just to like not pull it super tight, but just kind of keep it taut so that it sits nicely inside that stitch. We're just coming up to our last stitch here, which is that chain 1. So I'm going to insert, pull through. I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. So now we are back to what will be considered the front side of our work. So you can see this is already beginning to form the tail of that end of the K and the bottom part here. So I'm going to go on to row 3, and then I'm going to set you loose to do this on your own depending on what your letter is. You will follow your own stitch counts for your colors. You don't have to do this monogram, by the way. You can just make the bag and continue on and do just single crochets and finish your bag without the monochrome. So that is an option. So for those of you that are not really interested or feel like you have the patience to do this, what you can do is once you've got your 45 rows, just do another 32 and then meet back up with us at the end of that, and we'll still continue on the bag as usual. But in the meantime, those that want to follow the monogram pattern, I'm going to take you through one more row, and then I'll set you loose to follow your own monogram. So again, once I've chained 1, I'm going to carry my white up in. Actually, I'm going to carry it behind because now that I realize this is the front of my work. Also, at the end, these edges are going to be stitched in, so it's not the end of the world, but that's just how I roll. So now we're working again. So we're the front side of our work. We're going to work from right to left. So I know that when I look at my diagram, I have to do 9 red stitches. So I'm still using the red yarn. I'm going to skip this one right here because the chain 1 counts as 1. So this will be considered my second one. And I'll just pull that white in a bit. And I'm going to go ahead and do 9. But remember, once I get to the 9th, I have to resolve it by switching to the white color. So this is my 9th stitch, and I'm resolving it with the white. Okay. Coming up next, after I did 9 red, I'm going to do 2 white. So I will proceed to go into the very next stitch to do 1 and 2, but because I'm going to change, I go back to the red. So you see, this is why it's a project that really requires you to pay attention. So it's not probably a best one to sit and watch Netflix while you do this. You kind of have to focus a bit. So what we've done in the diagram here is we've done 2, and now we're going to switch back to the red for 1 and then 3 more in white. So these changes happen a little bit quicker in this one. So we're going to tuck that white down, insert, and do 1 in red, but immediately we're going to resolve it with the white because remember we only did 1 stitch. Okay. And then it calls for us doing 3 red. Sorry. 3 white, my apologies. So we're going to go 1, 2, and 3, making sure, again, resolving with the other color. So see, now you can see something is forming here. Okay, so in row 3 of my monogram, I've done 2, I left a space, I've done 3, and now we're going to do this chunk here in the red, which is our background color. So we're going to do 8 stitches in the red. This is my 8th stitch. So of course we have to resolve it with the white because we're changing over. And now we're going to do 3 stitches in white. Sorry guys, my camera is being very testy. Keeps going in and out of focus. So that's 2, and this is the 3rd one, and then I'll just bring back my red. So again, it's always being tucked in and under. And now I'm just going to do the rest of the row in red, which is 14 stitches. And I'm just coming up to the 14th stitch, which is into the chain 1, which sometimes can be nestled in here. There we go. And then we chain 1 and turn our work. So this is where I'm going to let you loose actually, guys, and I'll come up once the letter's taking more form. But you can see now in the diagram here, I've got a little bit of a tail worked in, and then it's going to scroll up. So that's what this is doing here. And this part here is the part where it's curled up here on the little foot, I call it. So that's pretty much the technique. The main thing to remember is whatever color you are not currently using, always keep it tucked down so that you work over it. It's basically like working over a tail, like a short tail, right? So the idea is that you hide the non-working yarn when you're not using it so that you can change your colors back and forth. So go ahead and finish your monogram letter, and I'll meet you back up when we are ready to do the last 4 rows. So remember, we started with 4 base rows, and we're going to finish with the top 4 base rows as being like a border. So when you're putting your diagram together with Stitch Fiddle, in this case, because I had done way more rows than I had anticipated, that's why I have a bigger gap. But in reality, I'm going to only do 4 rows on the bottom solid and 4 rows on the top. So keep that in mind when you're creating your particular shape. In my case, it's a letter. Okay? Hope that all makes sense. And the website's pretty straightforward, and you shouldn't have any issues. So either way, if you are not doing the monogram, I'm still going to meet you at the end here. If you are, I will also meet you at the end of your monogrammed shape, and then we will do the last 4 rows together. We will move on from there. Okay guys, so here we have our final front panel done. I got a little bit ahead of myself and actually went ahead and did the top finishing rows there. And so you can see, if I just bring it a little bit closer, that you can see the white kind of going through there, and we just stitched over the yarn there. So there is my monogram, the letter K. I love how that came out. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, I actually moved my stitch markers down a little bit just so that I had some of the variegated yarn coming through. So when the bag stands up, it'll be framed by a couple of the variegated rows on the bottom. And now I'm going to do just a few more along the top to finish off that side. So the K will be one side of the bag, and then the variegated color will be the other side. You can certainly do the monogram on both sides if you like, but that's just how I did mine. So I'm going to go ahead and do just a couple of more rows. I moved these markers down by 3 rows. So I'm going to add 3 rows on the top, and I move the markers down. So these represent the bottom of the bag. And then once I'm done that, we're going to go and talk about making the sides of the bag, and we're almost there. All right, so here is my front panel done. Now I've folded this perfectly in half. So if you're ever, I already started doing one of the side panels, but if you're ever uncertain about the width of your bottom, it will depend on how wide you want it. A great way to work it out is once you have your front panel done, is to take the whole thing. So that part is my back, this is my front. Remember, keep in mind that I used 2 different types of stitches, but I would recommend if you're starting out, use all one stitch, preferably the single crochet stitch if you're starting out. So that's why this one ended up tightening up a bit, and it's a bit narrower than the back one. I'm not worried about it at all. This is going to be a lunch bag after all, but if you really want to be precise about things, definitely stick to one stitch only. But in any case, so what I did is I took the whole panel and I folded it in half, and then you can really see where your middle is, and then count how many rows from each side. This is the front and the back, so that when your bag sits flat, your bottom will be like that, which is what I did. So as you can see, that's where I started working my side panel. So for me, that was about 12 rows of these. So that's where you can see I've got my stitch marker here. So I figured that out where I wanted my stitch markers depending on the width of my base, making sure that my front stayed even. So like I'd said before, I was going to do another row of the variegated yarn on the top just to create a little cohesion here. And I kept the front panel a nice solid color so you can see my monogram there. And so now what I did, once I had my stitch markers in place, I then started to crochet one of my side panels. So I've already done one here so you can see what it looks like. So I had my 2 stitch markers here. Let me just come in a bit more. And then what I did is I proceeded to do single crochets again, and I went into the, so what's happening is you're working into the side of these stitches. So in this case, it was this one here. So because I had used half double crochet stitches, the general rule is, well, usually for single crochets, 1 single crochet into the side of a single usually evens out. Half doubles are a bit funny because it's not quite 2 per side, but it's not quite 1 either. So even though I did 12 rows, I ended up working 14 stitches across. These are single crochet stitches. Now, if your whole bag is being done using single crochet stitches, you won't have an issue. You'll simply do 1 single crochet into the side of each stitch. So I'm just going to show you here. So see how it's not quite as even as when you're working into See, the tops of stitches are much more straightforward to find. So just, you know, be patient and just find a spot to insert your hook where you feel that looks cohesive. So that's what I did here. I ended up with 14 stitches across, and then I worked my way up. So what I did is I made sure that the length of my side equaled the height of the bag. So I'm going to show you that right here. So if I take this panel, because what we're going to do is we are eventually going to sew this together or stitch it together. So I take that corner and I hold it tight, or I hold it so that it folds right at that corner, and I just kept crocheting until my last row met with the last row of this bag. Okay, so that's how you know what the length is. In my case, I have 41 rows of single crochet stitches. This will vary depending on how big your bag is, but that's basically how you want to know to get the length, proper length of the side panel. So I'm going to take you through the second one here to show you how I did that. So I started, it doesn't really matter, but I'm going to start with the outside facing me. But it doesn't really matter actually. So we are going to start with a slip knot. So I'm going back to using the rest of my variegated yarn, and I'm hoping that I'm going to have enough to finish that side panel. I'm trying my best not to have a lot of leftover yarn. So that gets me super excited about buying new yarn. Okay, so I've got my 2 stitch markers in place because I've already counted out my my rows, but another quick and easy way to figure out if you're on the right track is to fold your bag lengthwise, make sure the corners match up, and then your stitch markers should match up with the edges of your first panel if you've already done your first one. So for me, I know I'm on the right track. So if you're working your first panel, you would have your stitch markers, and ideally you're going to have your stitch markers on your other side, but I always like to check and double check. Okay, so once you have your slip knot on your hook, we're going to find our first stitch marker here, and I'm just going to slip stitch to join where the stitch marker is. Maybe I'm going to take it out. And here we go. And I'm just going to slip stitch to join, and we're in. So then I will chain 1 and right back into that same stitch. See how you can see the space there? I'm going to insert my hook and just do a single crochet. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to single crochet into the sides of these stitches all the way until I hit my next stitch marker. And while I am doing that, I'm also going to try and work over my tail here. So I'm basically just going to go into what I think is a nice even spacing, always trying to pick up at least 2 loops here. For me, I find that strengthens my work a little bit, especially since this is going to be a bag. And I'm just going to single crochet, and now I'm going to go into here. So it's almost pretty much 1 stitch per stitch, but every couple of stitches you probably want to insert 2 along the side there, just to keep things nice and even. So I know that I should end up with at least 12 single crochets. Whoops. On the other side, I ended up with 14. So again, it's one of those projects that's not super exact when it comes to working into the sides of stitches, but you just want to look at it and just relatively keep things even. So there, you can see. So I'm pretty happy with the way that's going. It's looking not too bunched, not too spread out, sitting nicely. So this sometimes takes a little bit of patience because the end stitches sometimes are a little bit snug tighter than the others. So just take your time, really important. So I'm going to go ahead and finish my row here. And then I'm going to meet you once I hit my next stitch marker here. And then we'll talk about how to continue on, which I'm sure you will pick up quite easily. Okay, and I'm at my last stitch here, so I'm just going to take that stitch marker out and just insert wherever I can find a good spot. And so it turns out for me on this side I ended up having 15 stitches just because of where the sides sit, but I'm pretty happy with it. They are all looking fairly even, so I'm just going to keep mine as such. So I just compare this here. There we go. Perfect fit. Okay, so now we've established our base row for our side. So now we're just going to continue on. We're going to chain 1, and you're now going to turn your work. This could get a little bit cumbersome with all the panels you have going on here. Okay, so this is going to be the same for every row from now on until you reach the matching height of your front panel. So you'll always chain 1, you'll turn your work. With single crochets, I like to go right into that very first stitch there and single crochet. Okay, so that sits nicely like that. And then now it's easy peasy. You're just going to do 1 single crochet into each and every stitch all the way across. So if you had 14 stitches in your base row here, you should always end up with 14. If you have 15 or if you have 12, whatever your number is, really do your best to make it even at this point, because now you want to make sure that your work, each individual panel at least, should be nice and uniform. Okay guys, so once you have your 2 side panels done, your work will look a little something like this. So this is the inside, and then these 2 panels are going to fold in, and that is my front of my bag. So as you notice, you may notice hopefully, on this side here I left an extra long tail, and that's because this is what we're going to use to sew up this side of our bag. So that's what I'm going to show you next. So what I want to do is I want to have the right side facing down, and I am going to start with the end that has the long tail. I'm not going to worry about this one right now because I will stitch that in later once we do a finishing round. So this is the inside of my bag right now that's facing me. So what I want to do is I want to take one of my sides, which is this one, and I just want to pinch it right next to the other side here. Okay, so essentially you have something like this, and I've already thread my yarn through here. So I'm going to get my tapestry needle, and again I'm just going to ignore this long red one here. Once I've got my 2 sides nice and closely together with the top ends facing the right way, I just want to slip stitch. Okay, sorry, I just want to whip stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find anywhere along the top, I'm going to insert my needle, and then I'm just going to insert through the other side here. Okay, so pull that through, and I just pull it through all the way. So we're just going to do a simple whip stitch. So again, you're working through the sides of stitches. So right now, just insert your needle anywhere just along the edge there. I always try and catch a couple loops just because I feel like that fortifies my work a little bit more. So I'm just going to pull that through. And this part takes a little bit, not a super long time, but it just takes a little bit more patience because you've got to make sure that it's nice and snug, and you've got to be able to see where you're placing your stitches. You don't want to go too far into your project because then that will take out the uniformity of it all. So you want to keep it close to the edge, but just inward enough that you're going to have some good fortification. So this is pretty much what you're going to do all the way down to the bottom. Okay, so if I open that up, your work looks a little something like this. And remember, this is I'm facing the inside of my bag right now. Okay, so we're not going to worry too much that these white strips are showing here. In fact, it blends in nicely because the whole project has a couple of different shades of white and red. So we're going to be okay. So go ahead, whip stitch all the way to the end here. Okay, when you get to the bottom corner, I am just going to meet back up with you again because I'm not actually going to snip my yarn. We're going to sneak across here and then sew up the other side coming back up. So you have a bit of stitching to do and I will meet you shortly. Okay, so I have whip stitched mine all the way to the end here. So you can see that the corner, the bottom corner, is forming. And because I don't want to cut my yarn, what I want to do is I'm going to sneak this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sneak this strand across here to come up the other side, and then we're going to whip stitch the other side here. Okay. So I'm just basically going to weave my yarn needle in and out here, just trying to make sure that I am staying somewhat along the bottom ridge. Now again, the beautiful thing about this variegated yarn is that it's kind of hides a lot of the imperfections, so to speak. So I'm just going to gently pull that. So I don't want this one to be too snug because I don't want my work to bunch. So I'm just going to continue along here, and I'm just going to weave it in and out, up and over, until I get to the other side, which is right there. So just nice and easy. I'm going to pull that through. And again, I just want it to hide there. I don't want to pull it tight. Okay, so now when I look in the other side, which is going to be the outside, so if we undo, we see a little bit of a stitch running through there, which is not a big deal because it's sitting on the bottom of our bag, and this is going to be the right side of the bag. So see a couple of stitches running through there, and I am a-okay with that. Now that we're on the other side here, we're just going to continue whip stitching all the way back up to the top. Now be careful here because there are always some imperfections in crochet projects. So it might look like I can just bend really easily right there and go all the way up, but you might find this situation happen. And even though we measured beforehand, sometimes it just depends on the angle. So I would actually make sure these two top corners are aligned and then just follow my way back here, and there we go. So you see it's not that far off, it's just sometimes the way it's angled. And I would just continue on whip stitching from here. So again, I'm going to insert. You can do this from the back or from the front. Either way, they're both correct. And this first one, I'm not going to pull too snugly because remember, I don't want this seam to bunch up here. And then I continue on. I just find a couple loops on the back side and feed it through the front side. And I will continue doing that all the way up until I get to the other side of my panel here. So it's pretty straightforward once I've come up to the side. Oops, once I've come around the side. So I'm going to leave you to finish this panel off. Once you're done this panel, you're going to want to cut another long piece of yarn for this side and do the exact same thing. Now remember that you want the right sides facing inward when you're whip stitching. So that way it just gives you a little bit more uniform look. Once we're done that, then we will turn our work inside out or outside out. I forget how you say that. And then we will have our bag formed, and then we'll talk about creating our handles. So you can already see the bottoms forming nicely there. So guys, I will leave that with you, and I will meet you at the end of our 4 sides being stitched together. Okay, so I just started getting a little bit ahead of myself here. I had a really long tail, so I just started to do a finishing row here, which I'm going to talk about in a second. But this is what your bag now looks like with your sides sewn. So this is the inside. So now what we want to do is we want to turn it inside out. Just like that. And here is our bag. So now we've got the bottom of our bag that sits nicely. Just going to punch out those corners here. Just like that. So this is kind of the finished product. I love that. Actually, I really like how the variegated yarn mixed in with the solid. That looks really good. So see how the square bottom allows it to kind of sit on a little bit on its own now. So with that extra long tail, now what I'm going to do is I'm starting to single crochet just a little finishing row here, just before we start working on our handles. So I had such a long tail that I'm probably going to just reattach this back onto my white yarn and finish off that row. So just to bring this back down here a bit. So basically my tail ended here, so I just fed it through and chained 1. And then I just proceeded to single crochet into each stitch across. Now these particular stitches are going to be a little tighter because they were actually the bottom of my work. So that was the foundation chain row right there from the whole project. So it might be a little bit tighter. So that's all we're going to do right now is now we're just going to create a nice little finishing row all the way around. This is a great opportunity to work over your short tails here. And then we are going to talk about putting a little handle on our lunch bag, and then we are good to go. So right now we're just going to insert 1 single crochet into every stitch all the way around. All right, so I've done a finishing row in the white, and I'm actually going to switch colors here in a second. You don't have to, but because I've got some of this red left over, I want to make sure that I use it up. So what I've done is I've laid my work flat because now in the next row, we're going to start incorporating our handles. So you can probably see that I put some stitch markers here. So what I did is I laid it perfectly flat and folded it so that it's perfectly centered on the sides. Okay, and so this is my front. Now we remember that we had 40 stitches across here, and it lines up fairly nicely with the back as well. So what I've done is I've just kind of measured out roughly a decent size of an armhole, or sorry, I should say a hand hold, because generally I'm going to hold it with my hand this way. So of the 40 stitches, I initially had a smaller opening, but I found that it was probably a bit too small for my liking. So I widened it a little bit so that it's practically a third of the way. So we've got actually no, it's about half. So if we've got 40 stitches, I've got 10 stitches on each side of the stitch marker. This leaves me with 20 in the center. So just to keep things nice and even, I'm just going to flip this over, and exactly where it lines up here, I'm going to place 2 more stitch markers if I can find them. Okay. So I'm just laying it flat, and just going to bring this down a bit. And so right where these stitches line up, which for this one is right here, I'm just going to place another stitch marker there, so that way I know where to begin and end my handle. So that lines up right about there. Have I mentioned how terrible these stitch markers are? But for whatever reason, I keep using them. Okay, so here we have it. So what I want to do now is I'm just going to do, so I've just slip stitched to join here. I am just going to snip this off. I'm going to bring back in my red color, and then we're going to talk about how we're going to create these handles here. Okay, so I've got my new color, and I'm just going to slip stitch to join. And in fact, I am going to join back here, this back corner here. So I'm just going to insert my hook into any stitch there, and I'm going to slip stitch to join. Then I'm just going to work over my short tail here. So I'm going to chain 1. Now, if you didn't change colors, you wouldn't have to worry about doing this, but in my case, I did. So I'm just going to continue on as I usually did with my single crochet stitches, and I'm going to work over this tail all the way around, just like I did before. 1 into every single stitch. And then once I hit that first stitch marker around the way here, then we're going to chain up our first handles. So go ahead and do that. Another round, and I'll meet you there. Okay, so I'm coming up to that first stitch marker. And what I'm going to do is I am going to single crochet into that stitch where the stitch marker is. And once I do that, I can take it out. Okay, now I know that I had 20 stitches from one stitch marker to the other. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain 18. And the reason why I'm doing this is because when you create a handle, usually with weight and things like that, it does stretch a bit. So I'm going to take 2 stitches out. So I'm now going to chain 18. Once I've chained 18, just make sure it doesn't twist, I'm now going to go into the next stitch marker stitch, and I'm going to single crochet into that. And once I do that, I can now also remove that stitch marker. I don't need it anymore. So what we've done there, see that? That is the base of our handle. I know it doesn't look like much yet, but hang in there. So now you're just going to simply single crochet 1 into each and every stitch all the way around until you get to the very next stitch marker. So if I show you that, so see what we've done is we've created the handle for the front. So you're just going to continue on to the next stitch marker with 1 single crochet in each stitch all the way around. Once you hit that stitch marker, you single crochet into it, chain 18, and then single crochet into the next stitch marker. And that is our base row for our handles. So it's all done using single crochet stitches. So I will leave you there, And then we're going to talk about round 2 of making our handle. And I'm just at the end now, and I'm going to slip stitch to join this first round. So if we look at our bag, we have something that looks like this. So now our bag has our handles done. So if I laid it flat, we now can see where we're going to place our hands. Pretty cool, huh? Okay, so now round 2 is super easy. All we're going to do is we're going to chain up 1, and we're going to go back into that same stitch and single crochet, and that is what we're going to do all the way around. So you're just going to continue on doing single crochets, 1 into each stitch all the way around. Now, so here we go. We're just about ready to get onto that handle. So the last stitch is right here. So I'm going to insert there to do that last stitch before we go up the handle. Whoops. And a single crochet there. Let me do that again. Insert, pull through. There we go. So now we're simply going to go into each chain stitch, and yeah, no, I want to make sure that the V's face the front. Okay, so I'm just going to go into each chain right there. Might be a little snug, and I'm going to single crochet. So it's just like what you would do during a foundation chain row. You're going to insert and pull through. Okay, so I'm going to do another one. Okay, so you can see the effect. So now your handle is starting to have a little more solidification there. So that is what we're going to do. Just again, continue with your single crochets, 1 into each stitch all the way around. So once you've done your additional 3 rows, so after the first foundation chain row, I proceeded to do 3 rows of just straight single crochets, 1 into each stitch all the way around, and this is how your handles will come out. So it just gives it a little bit more fortification. For those of you that have seen my shoe bag tutorial, you'll probably remember that I did the handles slightly different. But since this was a lunch bag, it's made out of cotton, I thought I would use just the straight stitching. I thought I would just use the straight stitch on stitch method of using these single crochets, and I'm pretty happy with how it came out. So if I just sit it up now, my bag, sorry guys, I'll put it there, is ready to go to school, to work, wherever need be. And I really like that it's wider than the bag I was using before. So sometimes you've got larger Tupperware containers, and the fact that I made the bottom a little wider. So that was kind of the motivation for me making it this size. So there it is. I'm pretty happy with that. And I will actually, so I just slip stitched to join, and now I just need to snip off my yarn and fasten off. And that is September's gift of crochet, which is the lovely lunch bag. And we added an extra twist by putting a monogram here. That one's for me, and this handle, and there you have it. So guys, thank you so much for coming along on this month's gift of crochet journey. I hope that you found this fun to do. if not a little challenging, but challenging is always good. You know that you can always reach out to me. Just leave me a comment in the comment box down below, or you can email me directly at info@crochetcrafty.com. I'm always super excited, super happy to help you guys. Now remember, if you haven't subscribed, make sure to click that subscribe button so you'll never miss another episode. We upload every Wednesday. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me. Have a great day. Happy crocheting and take care.